say anything?
Yeah, just to mention.
You'll go up here.
Yes, they always do that.
I know.
Sorry.
Just give it
All right, well, can you hear me? Yep, there you go. All right, we will go ahead and get started here. I just first want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. I'm excited to see that we've packed the Albrecht wing here. We're going to start with Linda McCann. She's a local author. Just make sure after to come check out her books. She's got some books for sale, including what you're presenting on today. So I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, super. Well, thanks for coming, especially on a nice night. So, I am very local. I grew up in Bremer County. I now live in Shell Rock. But I've always loved history. And so, when we moved to Shell Rock, I was working on my family genealogy. And I was completely surprised to find out I was descended from the founder of Shell Rock. No one knew that, and like I said, I was completely shocked. Well, that got me into searching Shell Rock's history, which by that time we'd lived there about 20 years, and I found 8 named locations around Shell Rock that I'd never heard of. Anybody ever heard of Frog Flats? Yes. Yeah, some of you have. Super. Well, that's the sort of stuff I ran into. And I actually did a book just on these 8 named locations, and it was just stapled together. Very simple, you know. Well, Frog Flats, of course, got everybody's interest, and this is over near the swimming pool in Shell Rock. And I actually couldn't find information on it, so I went out to the care center thinking somebody there might know about it. Well, one of the ladies said to me, "This is only a couple blocks from your house. Have you heard the frogs?" No, I haven't heard the frogs. She tells me, "You have to go down there after it's been dry, and then we get rain, and you will hear the frogs. And you have to go at midnight." So I went, and I heard the frogs, and again, it's just unreal. The librarian in Shell Rock called me just a few weeks ago and asked me where Frog Flats was. I wanted to tell her to look in the book. So a publisher's agent found this little book, called me, asked if I could do a county-wide book and could we have a series. And I kind of went, I think so. So Butler County was my first book to be published. And I was completely surprised to find 65 named locations in Butler County that most people don't know. Well, I did Blackhawk next because my publisher wanted a bigger county. There's 95 in Blackhawk County. And of course I'm working on Bremer because I want to do Bremer County. Well, when I'm working there, I begin to find stuff that I knew nothing about. And one of the things I've never heard was the trolley. Some of you know the trolley? Yep. Some don't. Well, so I said to my publisher, I think I've got another book here. It really sounds interesting. I don't know anything about it. She said, go, see what happens. And that's what kind of happens. I find something, I talk to my publisher, and she says to go. So I'm talking to you tonight about Rosie, the Riveters of Iowa. And again, I had wanted to do Rosie for a long time because, you know, we think we know about Rosie, but I was surprised at what I didn't know about Rosie. So, you know, I'm working on it, and I approach her about it, and she says, go. So, again, it just astonished me what I found out. Now, women actually worked in factories during World War I also. I did not realize that. And this was the first time that black women worked with white women with no problems. So as they're building up to World War II, the government, the military, the factories all know they're going to need women to get this stuff done. And so the government actually hires a PR firm, public relations firm, and the PR firm is who comes out with the Rosie the Riveter nickname. Now, Rosie was just one of them, and there's bunches more on the computer. The ones I kind of talked about was Wendy the welder. They welded on battleships. Isn't that something to think about? Assembly line Annie. Now, women love to do assembly line work because they could talk to each other. Men said their hands were too big for that. Betty the Bucker held the stuff for Rosie. Jenny on the job was the model worker, and Tilly the typist. Those are just a few. Like I said, there's bunches more. And they were really just nicknames to get people's interest and want to know more and maybe want to become a Rosie, that sort of stuff. So I was lucky enough to be able to talk to women, and I overheard a lady when I was down in Southeast Iowa say she'd been a Rosie. So when I could, I went to her and I said, I think I heard you say you were a Rosie. And she just starts telling me about it. She'd gone to California to work. And so we're talking about it and stuff, and I said, would you happen to have any way that I could get a hold of some of the Rosies? She reaches in her purse and brings out her phone. Turns out she was one of the founding members of the Rosie Foundation, which is a nationwide program. And as of 2 years ago, she was still on the board of the Rosie Foundation. So on her phone, she had all these names and addresses and phone numbers and everything. What luck, huh? So I said, well, would you be able to send me the Iowa connections? She said, I'll do you one better. I'll contact them, and if they'll talk to you, I will send you their information. She sent me 35 phone numbers, emails, whatever. And then I was able to talk to more, so I talked to around 60 women who had been Rosies. And the stories they can tell, I couldn't think up the questions to get that answer. So down in Southeast Iowa, as of 2 years ago, there was still a group that was meeting once a year of Rosies. Now imagine what age they're getting to now. Well, they met once a year to keep in contact with each other, to catch up, to reminisce. And after I had heard about this from several of the women, I said, would I be able to come to your next get-together? They said, we'll have to talk about that. Well, they did get back to me, and they said I could come. There were a few stipulations, though. I could not audio tape, I could not videotape, I could not take notes, and I could not ask questions. So I'm up here and thinking of going down by Fort Madison, and is it worth the trip? It was worth the trip, believe me. I wouldn't have got so much of this information without just, when they first came in, they talked to me, and then I think they forgot I was there, and they began talking about stuff. So it was kind of interesting to hear. This group of ladies couldn't figure out why a company, a factory, was going to hire them and pay them to do work they didn't know how to do. And so several of them decided they were going to go to this company and find out why they were going to get paid for work they didn't know how to do. Well, they went to the gate. Now, interesting, the ladies would not tell me what town this was in or what factory it was in. And I'll kind of bring this together in a few minutes. So, they went to this factory, and there was a guard at the gate, and he wouldn't let them in. And he said, come back when you've changed your pants and you cut your hair. And this was before the war started. And they said, just a minute, we want to talk to somebody. We want to find out about this job. And the guard closed the gate and walked away. So again, they went back and reported this to the other ladies. And you know, they're seeing movies, they're seeing stuff in magazines and the newspaper. We need you. I don't even have a Rosie book to show you. But that's the, Norman Rockwell drew the picture that we know of as Rosie. And so this is what they were trying to get through to the women. We need you. So these women are hearing this, but they don't know what they're going to do because they can't find out from anybody. And, you know, how are they going to do work that they don't even know how to do? One of the ladies popped up and said, I had never picked up a screwdriver, and they wanted me to run a drill press. Yeah. And several of the ladies, you know, again said, truly, I think almost every lady said that they didn't get any training. They were shown how to do it, and then they were expected to do it. And I had noticed, I read old newspapers, so from the 40s I'm reading newspapers, and I kept hearing about them cutting their thumbs off. Well, you know, in a saw and this, I don't know how many did. Another lady did something and had to have 100 and some stitches in her shoulder. And that's what the ladies told me. They got training after somebody got hurt. And then they would train them how to do this. Otherwise, you watch somebody do it, and then you're supposed to step up and run a drill press or whatever. One lady said she was told she was going to weld in the nose of an airplane because she was small. She said, I didn't know a thing about welding, and she refused, and they did give her a different job. But you know, this is all going on just to get them to work and to figure out what's going on. So these ladies do decide to go. They wish they had their husbands to talk to because the husbands were all fighting the war. So they go to work, and the very first day there's a problem. There are no women's restrooms. Well, kind of figures. They never had to have them, you know. Now, smart me, I said, well, did they talk to the HR person? Well, of course they told me there was no HR person. But again, this is the first thing they ran into. Well, some of the men went and cleaned one of the men's restrooms, and that became their restroom. When I went up to Northwest Iowa to talk to them, they told me they used porta potties all the time. Well, porta potties weren't in use at that time, so it was probably drop pit toilets, and they used them summer and winter. So that's the first thing they ran into. The second thing was, most of these women didn't drive, and if they did, there was gas rationing. And so they depended on buses and this sort of stuff. And they did go to somebody at the company and say, we need more bus routes, we need more buses. And that person did go to a bus company, and the bus company told them, we can't hire any more men, we can't find them. Not women, we don't have any more men, you know, normal. The other thing that came up right away was grocery stores, laundromats, all of this was open Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. They couldn't even buy groceries. You know, that's when they were working. And little by little, things began to change. But in the beginning, all this kind of hit them right away. And they were beginning to wonder, is this worth it, you know? Now, a lot of companies started carpools. Or, you know, they'd send a car to pick them up. It was kind of interesting to me. They would send a car to some parking lot, and they had it figured that they could put 8 women in the car with the man driver. And I'm just going, 9 people. Yeah. Well, remember, the cars were bigger, but finally my husband, I didn't realize I was talking about it so much. Finally, my husband said to me, they didn't use seat belts. Right. Yeah. But again, that's another thing that came up with all this. Babysitters were a problem. Now, you know, a lot of times they had relatives or family that could do it, but soon the War Department changed the age for women to work. They dropped it from 18 to 16 that women could go to work, and school attendance in Iowa dropped by 25%. Isn't that something? I mean, it kind of figures, but wow. And there went babysitters, you know. Now, the War Production Board had issued a statement, and it was all over, that no one's wages should depend on their sex. Well, we know how that works. At that time, men were being paid $56.65 per week. Women were paid $31.21 per week. And that $31 compares to $600 now. The thing that I think shocked me was these women were doing hard work that most of them didn't know how to do. Between December of 41 and January of 44, 37,500 women were killed on the job. Now this is nationwide, but still, you know, 37,000 were killed on the job. And about 210,000 women were permanently disabled. So again, you know, this is dangerous work and all of that. Well, for whatever reason, when I started this, I had the idea that Iowa didn't have much going on. Most of our women went to the West Coast. Well, as I'm researching, Iowa had 70 factories with military contracts all over the state. So we had 70 companies that needed women to do this work. And so again, they get going. Now we had 3 factories here in Waverly. Anybody know some of them?
Marshall County.
Yep, exactly. I didn't know that one.
Sugar beet factory? Sugar beet?
Right. Got the third one?
Nestle?
The brewery?
No. Bremer Pack.
Yeah, there was a
Oh,
week
very
back.
near my mind, Bremer County.
Yeah. Bremer Pack was down in the area of Nestle now. And they were preparing eggs, hard boiling them, and preparing meat, and it was all going to the military. And I was in that building. My mother worked there in the late 50s and early 60s. And I mean, it seemed primitive then, you know. So I knew about that one. The other, Marshall County, was up at College Town Plaza, and it was right along the railroad tracks. The interesting thing is, and Marshall County had about 6 companies statewide. The interesting thing is, Marshall County would support getting a POW camp to the area. When a POW camp, now everybody know Waverly had a POW camp? A few of you don't. The library has the book. Anyway, the Marshall County and other companies would agree to hire POWs to get a POW camp into the area. So Marshall County had the POWs out working in the fields of the farmers all around the area. Then they had the Rosies working in the canning factory, canning the vegetables and such. And again, all their work went to the military. And the third place was the sugar beet factory. And the government had really pushed farmers getting into raising sugar beets, because again, they needed the sugar. And we couldn't necessarily get it from the other places we had been getting it. So they would raise the sugar beets, and this sugar beet factory would turn it into sugar or to honey. And so all that was going on here. Now, unfortunately, there's not much record of how many women worked in any of them. They're estimating nationwide 19 million women worked. Nationwide. Isn't that something to think about? But that's truly an estimate because nobody kept facts, you know. Of course, in Waterloo, John Deere, all these had stuff. And, you know, again, they began running cars to get people where they wanted to go and such. It's unreal. Heinz Company in Muscatine opened a daycare nursery. And that was one of the first nurseries that a factory opened for the women.
Wow.
So we had a lot of new stuff going on. John Deere had a contract for $10 million, and they were producing bulletproof transmissions for tanks. Isn't that something to think about? Just trying to kind of look to see if there's anything else. Powers Manufacturing of Waterloo made 125,000 jackets and 20,000 shirts for the Army. Now the airplanes were not heated at this time, and so there was concern they had to keep the pilots warm, you know. So there was a, sorry, I'm looking for it, I can't think of the name right now. There was a company over by Sioux City that skinned mink, and they sold those mink pelts to the military to insulate their jackets and such for the pilots. Now again, before the war, it was not thought proper for women to work in the fur company, you know. But with the war, it was okay for them to go to work. So all this is going on, you know, just getting it done, that sort of stuff. Now there were women that did leave Iowa, and they mostly did go out to California. I talked with a lady that went to Chicago, and she worked for the Curtis Candy Company, which makes chocolates for the mess kits. And they had told the women that they could eat all the chocolate they wanted. Yeah, we know how that went. So now these women really wanted to continue working. And there was a survey done in early '45 of all the states asking if you could continue working, would you? 75% of the respondents said they wanted to continue working. Well, they had been told from the very beginning when the war ended, they were gone. Oh shoot, I just thought, I didn't tell you why they couldn't talk about stuff. When the women got hired, they had to do paperwork, of course. One of the papers they had to fill out said that they would not talk about or share anything they did or saw for 50 years after the end of the war. And they had to sign this. Well, of course, the women didn't want to sign it, but they couldn't work if they didn't sign it, so what did we do, you know? So, for the most part, they signed it. Now, as I was talking to people, I had people tell me they couldn't talk about it yet. And I would try to explain to them that they could, and I didn't get anywhere. I had it, should I be about done? Okay. I had an interesting experience that I didn't pull together until I was researching this book. I was an RN working at Sartori in Cedar Falls in the early 70s. And one day somebody said to me, our ward clerk had been a Rosie. Well, that got my interest. So when I could, I said to her, hey, I heard you were a Rosie. What did you do? I can't talk about it. This is the early 70s. I knew nothing about any of this. And I probably harassed her for several days. Okay, so in '97, and I know the year because my oldest granddaughter had been born, And my mother-in-law, me, my daughter, and our granddaughter were in a store in Cedar Falls. And a lady walks over and starts talking to my mother-in-law. And I'm kind of going, that looks like Evelyn, the ward clerk. Is that Evelyn? Gosh, I don't know, you know. So like I said, this is 97. I'm about to walk over there and she's gone, which was Evelyn. All of a sudden she's right here. And she didn't say hello, she didn't say anything. She said, I worked for the FBI and I broke code. And she was gone again.
Oh.
So she definitely knew she could talk about it, you know. But again, I tried to contact her, but I didn't get anywhere. So anyway, as they're leaving, the company had told the women, prepare to be done. Get your stuff out of your lockers, clean up. One day you're going to come to work and you're going to be told the war's over. So the women went to work, started working, and all of a sudden they were told, shut down, war's over, you're going home. So they went out, and they couldn't figure out why there was a line to get out the gate. So they got in line, and when they got there, they had to sign this form again. This is 97. They had to sign this form again that they would not talk about it. So, again, they signed it. They still weren't sure about it, but they signed it. And they went on. So, you know, again, this sort of stuff is what kind of the women wondered what they knew that they couldn't talk about, you know. And I'm sure they don't really understand. The women helped to produce 296,000 airplanes, 102,000 tanks, 37,000 artillery pieces, 47 million tons of ammunition, and 37,000 warships. I came to believe that we might not have won the war without the women. Now, a lot of people have said to me this was the beginning of women's lib, and I said, no, I don't really think so. I think it was the beginning of mothers telling their daughters you can do anything, because they have. Questions, comments?
I had two aunts that worked in Waterloo. It was called the Associates, Chamberlain.
Sure.
And they told me that they used to make bombs.
Yeah, they did. Chamberlain made, this is in the book. Sorry, I can't remember all the numbers. Chamberlain sent 110 carloads of bombs per month.
Wow.
And they employed 350 women. Now, Chamberlain is one of the areas that, of course, they didn't know what this ammunition had in it, and a lot of people ended up with cancer and such.
Yeah.
But that hit both men and women.
Mm-hmm.
I have books for sale in the other room, and you can sure ask your questions and stuff. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much, Linda. Your presentations are always amazing. So yes, after, make sure to get your copy. I'm sure there's plenty more stories in there to share. I'm going to introduce our next speaker. We have Hector Mares. Is that how you pronounce your last name? Yeah, okay. I met him through their volunteers at Sturdevant House, and I think they're helping us at the museum this year, but he's going to talk about your service that you did. And thank you for your service.
I'm going to put this down. I think I can put that.
I'll turn it off.
So, Linda,
Yeah.
just your 50-year thing about the women couldn't talk about it.
Yeah.
So I'm going to give a speech about my military service and Department of Defense service, and it's kind of vague because locations and dates and missions I can't talk about either. So I'm going to give you two prompts because I'm probably going to say a couple of things that you're not familiar with. So if I say something that you don't understand, raise your hand, I'll answer your questions. So this is a geographic combatant command map. So each of the geographic areas, North America, South America, Europe, Africa, Asia, are headed by a military general, and that area is his responsibility, and he has military forces from the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, and Space Force that work for him over those areas. So this is what that map looks like. And then this map is a map of how Desert Storm was fought and won. So I came into the military just before Desert Storm, and so I've done years. I spent 20 years fighting the Mideast War and multiple deployments and all that. So I've done Desert Shield, Desert Storm, Iraqi Freedom, Enduring Freedom. I'll just go ahead and start with my speech here. My speech is written, so I'm going to do a lot of reading and try and cover as much as I can. So I entered the service in 1984. I'm an Army person. I went in as enlisted, and I retired as a commissioned officer. I was a major in the Army. So I went from enlisted service to OCS, Officer Candidate School. I'm going to try. I don't have any acronyms in my paper. And my paper was proofread by Dr. Lindell. So I shouldn't have any of those. I was an Army intelligence officer, did operations, was a paratrooper. I've been into 8 countries: Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, Iraq, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, Cuba, and Germany. I spent time in 6 joint commands, and a joint command is all services, civilians, and contractors. So a unit like 82nd Airborne, an Army unit, all you can have is Army guys. You have like the Marine Corps 3rd amphibious unit, it's all Marines. But a joint unit has all service members, has civilians and contractors. So I worked at U.S. Central Command down at MacDill Air Force Base. They're the ones who are responsible for the Mideast. So if you hear like U.S. Central Command or U.S. CENTCOM, it's the same thing. And I worked for the Joint Special Operations Command out of Fort Bragg. They're the ones that do hostage recovery and counterterrorism operations. So I'm trying to think of the ship that was taken over by the pirates off Somalia that they made into a movie, and they rescued Tom Hanks. That was a joint Special Operations Command mission, and so that's what they do. I worked at U.S. Africa Command, AFRICOM, in Europe, and they're responsible for all 54 countries in Africa. They look at it and partner with their military forces and help train them and help plan exercise with them. I came back to the United States and I was at U.S. Cyber Command, CyberCom in Maryland. That's where NSA is stationed. And then my final unit was at the Joint Staff at the Pentagon. I did like 5 years there. So, but now I get into my story. So I was born in Brooklyn, New York. My father was a Navy sailor. So I grew up in the Northeast and the Southeast, the eastern coast of the United States, because that's where all the military Navy bases are, and then the West Coast. So I grew up on the East Coast. And then I started my military service when I was in college. I joined the reserves to help pay for college. I worked at college during my work days, school days, and then I did on the weekends, went and did military training and exercises and all that kind of stuff to help pay for my school. I joined while I was in the training, I did my basic training. I did advanced individual training as a heavy equipment operator, so cranes and bulldozers and all that kind of stuff. Then another set of training, I did airborne training. I got my jump wings, and then I did that at Fort Benning, Georgia. While in school, I had completed my Management Information Systems bachelor's degree at University of Central Florida, and then my Business and Operations Security Management master's at Webster University. I started that in Florida, in Tampa, Florida, while I was in the service, and I finished while I was at Washington, D.C., again, as the military service, because I had deployments. I would go overseas for 3 to 6 months at a time, and so I couldn't go to school and all that. So 2-year degree took me like 7.5 years to complete. So, but that was, it was good stuff there and all that. And then while I was in the reserves, I had a leader of mine suggested that, hey, you should look at the officer candidate school. And that person convinced me to apply for it. I applied for it, I was selected, I went through, completed it, got commissioned as a second lieutenant, and the Army commissioned me as second lieutenant in the military intelligence branch. I know people will tell you that's an oxymoron, but military and intelligence together. But it worked out for me. So, so key events: August to 1990. Saddam Hussein sent his military into Kuwait, to take over the oil, and on October 7th. We started Operation Desert Shield. We set troops in there. The first troops that went in there was 82nd Airborne, because there's an airborne unit that jump out of airplanes and all that, and they're very light. They don't have trucks and tanks and all that. It's just ground guys. They're called grunts. And so they sent them there quick because they're trained to respond to anything in 24 hours. And so they have units that are on a 2-month rotation. All you do is you stand by, get ready to go anywhere. And so they went over there, and then we started sending units in there in September, October, and November. And then in February is when combat action started. So, but after the 2nd of October, 42 nations formed a multinational coalition under the command of U.S. Army General, a 4-star General, Norman Schwarzkopf. We're familiar with that name, right? And so, so the total coalition forces equal 950,000 troops. The U.S. sent 697,000 of that 950. So over 2/3 of that were U.S. forces. But we had a coalition. We had everyone working together. So the coalition leaders sent their forces to bases throughout the Mideast. And if you look again, that map here, it kind of shows that they were all different nations and countries in the Mideast. I was assigned to an aviation unit, and I was one of their strategic intelligence officers. And we worked 12-hour shifts. So the first month I was on days, and the other guy was on nights. And the next month we would switch. We did that for almost a year, and we didn't get any days off. So another thing that was different about Desert Shield and Desert Storm was that was really the first time that the U.S. military brought in its reserve and National Guard troops to fight major combat operations. And in the beginning, one of the first units that got called was the 48th Field Artillery Unit in Georgia. And that half their unit was like, wait, no, I'm not here, I'm quitting. It's not what I signed up for. And you couldn't, because you have a contract, and that's part of your job. That's to go to the training to be a military member. Someday you may have to go. And that time came up. And so that's when the military started integrating reserves and National Guard guys. And so like today we had three National Guard guys return from overseas deployments. So that's what started it all out. So I was there, we were doing that for almost a year and all that. And as an intelligence officer, I worked with our unit, other coalition forces, national intelligence agencies to get information to be able to brief our pilots. We did that every day. And so we gathered information to brief them on their daily mission. Where you're going to fly, what you're looking for, what are you going to report on, locations of friendly and enemy units, because there's always a chance of getting friendly fire. You try and limit that as much as possible, but it happens. And because of that, we taught them about escape and evasion procedures for our down crew members. We briefed them on the radio frequencies, their call signs, and enemy threats they may face. So you want to prepare them as much as possible what their mission is going to be for that day. If it goes good, good. If it doesn't go good, at least you have an idea of what to expect and how to plan for that. So that's what we did on a daily basis. And then I had an additional duty for my unit. I was a unit movement officer. So my job was to plan the movement of all of our equipment, trucks, gear, aircraft, from our home station to our seaport and airport, because the planes flew and then everything else was shipped over by ships, was moved by ship. And then we have to track it, and then we would send the troops over, and the troops would go to their base, and then as part of the movement officer, I had a team of men, it was like a half a platoon size, 30 guys, and then we would have to like monitor when ships were coming in and when aircraft were coming in. But just because the ship said it was going to be at this port on this day, did not mean it always showed up that way. It could be at a different port, it could be there 3 weeks earlier or 6 weeks later. So every day we traveled probably 1,000 miles all throughout the Mideast, just going to these different ports looking for our equipment. And then we would bring it back. And once we brought it all together, then we would have to get it ready for combat operations. And then when the war was over, we spent 3.5 weeks cleaning the vehicles, because you have to, get all the sand, dirt off and all that. And we washed those vehicles like 40 times. Because, you didn't want any foreign insects, any foreign dirt, any plants that get brought in by mistake and all that. So, yeah, that was not a fun part, but it's part of the mission, so. What else? Yeah, so after we arrived in Saudi Arabia, we were flying out around the area. So on the 17th of January, 1991, so. So, August 2nd of 90, they invaded. September, October, November, December, January, 6 months later, we had enough troops in there to start aerial bombarding the Iraqis. So, if you look at the videos of helicopters, stealth fighters, and all that,
Here, let me look to see if I can see what.
See if anybody's cares.
Dan in a white car.
well, at least I'm up there too.
Are you serious? Oh my gosh. Oh, Lord have mercy.
Okay, the intermission's over. So at least it's cool it off in here.
So sorry. I have no idea how that happened. I think I'm not hanging on to my keys in my pocket. Maybe that happened.
Was that code for something, Hector?
You can't talk about it.
All right, so just to reiterate, so on August 2nd they attacked. 6 months later on 17, this is a really interesting point here, because if you look on information about this, they list the date as here in the States. On the States it was the 17th of January. Over in the Mideast, the time difference wasn't on the 16th of January. So that's a little trivia piece there. So here they have, so on the 17th January, we began bombing the Iraqi military from the air. We did that for about 6 weeks. On the 24th of February, we had ground combat operations where, remember, they had berms that they built up and all that. We went through with bulldozers, knocked the berms out, and just started streaming forces into the area. And we did a lot of stuff to prepare the battlefield. So we showed them, so like, this is the Persian Gulf, and this is Bahrain, because Bahrain's on the coast. We showed the Iraqis, because they were in the country here, that we were coming this way. Well, actually, we brought troops all the way around. It's called the hook. And we made them think we were coming here. We put troops there, we would have radio communications, we'd have planes flying in this area only. And we did the left hook, and 4 days later, 100 hours, the battle was over. Iraq left Kuwait. And that's where you hide the highway of death, because as they were trailing, we'd come in with helicopters and planes, and you know, you blow up the first one, and you blow up the last one, and then it's just a free fall, just whatever you want. And you know, thousands of tanks and vehicles and all that, and you know. But yeah, 4 days later, the war was over, and the coalition had liberated Kuwait. A negative outcome of the Gulf War, though, was exposure to oil well fires, depleted uranium tank rounds. And what those are is it's a tank round that has a titanium tip on it, and it's filled with depleted uranium, because uranium is very, very heavy metal. So you have a round that's traveling, has a high kinetic speed. It's got a titanium tip that will punch through the armor, and then you have the depleted heavy uranium that will just go through it and all that. And that, as you go through it, it creates a vacuum, and then it explodes. But what that does is it produces powder, uranium powder. So you have oil well fires, depleted uranium attack rounds, chemical weapons that they fired at us, and then preventive medical inhibitors, nerve agent treatments and toxins, burn pits, because you're in a desert, you got to get rid of certain stuff, your bathroom stuff. So you just put them out in burn pits, and you put fuel on it, and then you just let it burn and all that. But you know, the guys who are there, and the people who are the units who are in the air and all that, get exposed to that, because you got all those chemicals. It's just what burn pits are. Anthrax shots. I took 7 of those to prepare for that. They had uniforms impregnated with pesticides, and then you had unfamiliar insects, and then the dust. The dust caused a lot of problems. So a lot of like Gulf War veterans have sinusitis, where your nose is always running, you sleep and your throat gets, you know, all clammy and all that, and a lot of sinus pressure, headaches, and you think like, wow, you know, everywhere I go. Even when I went in the States, I went to Europe, I went to Africa, I was always like, man, I was getting allergies. It's not allergies. It's this sinusitis and all that. And so these toxins led to an illness known as either Gulf War illness or Gulf War syndrome. And it has affected over 250,000 servicemen. So we sent 700,000. 250,000 of them have. So again, it's, you know, more than a third. And but you know, they're increasing the benefits. They're doing more studies. They're finding out more stuff and all that. They've actually recognized it as an actual medical condition and all that. So I returned to the States in '91, and there's another interesting tidbit. I was in the desert for like almost a year, and just to give you some, I had heard before I went there that it could snow in the desert. I'm like, how is that possible? It happens, just atmospheric conditions. And so I was there a couple of times it happened. You'd be in the daytime, and it's like 120 degrees. And we had those, out there, if you look at the veteran portion of that, those little like light tan and dark tan, they're called chocolate chips, because they have black dots throughout and all that. And we had black leather boots. And you had to drink like, I'm talking liters and gallons of water per day. And you would drink that, and your boot would have outlines of salt on your boots, because you're just sweating so much. You don't feel it because it just evaporates so quickly, because you sweating helps you cool down. But when it evaporates that quickly, it doesn't really help you a lot. So you have to drink all the time, otherwise it's going to affect you. So it'd be 120 degrees at daytime, and then you're out there in the field at night, and it's 40 degrees. Like you just say, oh, that's 40 degrees, that's not cold. But when your body goes through an 80-degree change in 6 hours, you can't do it. And so we would have like in the desert, long johns, our uniform, our chemical uniforms, gloves, scarves, hats with ear pads on, standing next to a fire, and you're still like, you know, it's just crazy. So I returned in '91, continued my military career. I deployed to the Mideast several times through the early 2000s. I went to Afghanistan, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait. I was in an Operation Enduring Freedom, And then I went to Iraq for Operation Iraqi Freedom and New Dawn. And, but I had two significant events that occurred to me while I was in the service. The first one, I was working in a combined media processing center. So we were having combat operations in Iraq, and then you go blow up a building or you go blow up a military location, all that. Then you go in and look and see what you can find, get intel, get data information, so you can generate intelligence off and all that. And so we found a map. It was all in Iraqi language, and so we looked at it like, this looks like it has some good value. There's a lot of locations and signs that could be important, all that. And so once we had it translated, we were able to find out that this was like a fighting map of the area. We found it in this city, but it was for this city, and this was the city we were fighting in. So we had positions where guys who used roads, they used paths, they went underneath culverts to move weapons and ammunition, move troops around, all that. Sniper locations and buildings and all that kind of stuff. It was an important map because we were in the battle there and all that. So we found that, we translated it, and we presented it to the intelligence and operations officers of Army, Navy, Air Force, Special Forces units. And they used that to plan the defense air attack. And so that happened, and that having that information saved a lot of lives. So that was my first big key thing, key event that helped out. And then that was like my last military assignment. So I got out, and I was able to find a job with the Department of Defense. And lo and behold, I was doing the same stuff. I just changed from a military uniform to a suit and tie. I was still working on Middle East problems. And, so I became a Department of Defense civilian and began working there. The second event, I was working for an organization that does POW-MIA intelligence. And there's two elements of the POW-MIA. One is the one that everyone knows about. They're the ones that go and find the bones from prisoners that have not come back home and all that stuff, or they haven't been found, and they're doing some stuff and they find bones, and oh look, there's a compass here, there's a watch here and all that. This is an American, and all that. That's one side. The other side that I was on, was the intelligence portion of it. And so we help, again, like I mentioned earlier, we help prepare aviation crews and ground forces. If you're going to be in this area here, this is the friendly side of the country. This is the unfriendly side of the country. If you need to go to a hospital, this is the hospital you want to go to. None of the other hospitals. These are the good guys. These are the bad guys. This is the language. This is how they look at Americans and all that kind of stuff. So we did that. And so while I was working there, I have my POW-MIA coin. So I think the little ones back there keep asking me where did I get these and how did I get them. I worked at this unit, and when I finished my assignment there, they gave me this. This is like a going away gift. To prove that I was there. So I was working at this unit. I was monitoring Western journalists that were detained in Syria, and Western, British, French, Americans, and all that. And I had discovered two sites that had Western journalists, and I was just checking through what they call an air tasking order. An air tasking order, it's about, that time it's about this thick. And it listed, okay, this is target 1. This is plane 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is the weapon system that they're using, and these are the targets they're going for. And I was doing a scan through and all that, looking from, I don't need every country in the area. My area was Syria, and like southern Syria. So I went down to that part, and I was looking through that, and I found that one of the targets one of the sites that I had was monitoring for having Western journalists was on the list. This was a Friday to be bombed on Monday. So I called them on leadership, let them know what I found and all that, and they're like, run with it. So I went up to the leadership in my organization. Then I had to call the Joint Staff from the Pentagon, and I called CENTCOM, Central Command, because this was happening in their area. You don't do military operations without coordinating with the owner of that area. And so I called CENTCOM, and CENTCOM then called back EUCOM, European Command, and they came back to the Joint Staff, and they approved, they all agreed, yes, this is a good thing and all that. So they took the targets off the strike list. 2 weeks later, the locals rioted, and they attacked the prison, and it caused enough disturbance where some of the journalists were able to escape. And then a short time later, a couple of them were found by the locals and were turned over to coalition forces. One of the guys that I was monitoring was a Vietnam-era SEAL who was working for a non-governmental organization, like Peace Corps. I go in and help civilians. I don't do military operations, but they're to help the people and all that. And we turned him over to coalition forces, and then sometime later on, he went back home to live safely in America. So that was my second cool moment. Another time I was, after that, I served in Germany for 6 years, and I worked at the U.S. Africa Command. And while I was there, working in their Joint Operations Command Center, so like you have it here, you would call it like Emergency Operations Center. But it had, again, all military forces, civilians, it had agencies, it had like FBI, Treasury, Commerce, Department of State, it had everyone in these organizations and all that. And so I provided support to the Ebola crisis. We had a big, huge exercise set up for that with forces from the United States, from Germany and all that. And that whole thing got canceled within a week because we started supporting Ebola. We started sending troops to the African continent, starting sending medical supplies, getting, personal protective gear and all that stuff, the masks, the gloves, the outfits, and developing the shots and all that. I was working on that during that time. Did also hostage rescues because the Somali piracy was going on. We did counterterrorism missions and then do some yearly exercises with the other African countries and all that. While there, I met and worked with a guy in the same area that I worked with that was from his family lived outside of Cresco, Iowa. Significant of that is because my mother-in-law, who lives with us, she's lived with us for 14 years, she was born in Cresco. And so, and we became really good friends and all that. And who'd have thought that, I met a guy from Iowa and in Europe. So yeah, it was interesting. He was a good guy,